Today, we're diving deep into one of the most dramatic developments in Northern Europe, something that Russian President Vladimir Putin has feared for years, and now it's finally happening. The Baltic Sea, once seen by Moscow as a strategic playground, has completely shifted against Russia's interests. The unthinkable has occurred. Putin's worst Baltic fear has come true. This moment marks not only a strategic setback for Russia, but also a powerful realignment in the security and naval balance of Europe. For decades, Russia has treated the Baltic region as an essential lifeline to the West. The port city of St. Petersburg and the military hub in Kaliningrad gave Moscow two critical gateways to Europe. These routes allowed Russia to move military assets, energy supplies, and trade ships freely. But all of that has changed. The countries surrounding the Baltic Sea, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and the Baltic states, have now united in ways that leave Russia almost completely surrounded. What was once a mixed zone of influence has now become a solid NATO-controlled zone. This means that Russia's access to the Baltic is now under constant Western surveillance and control. Putin has always known that losing control of the Baltic Sea would be catastrophic. When Finland joined NATO in 2023, it was already a major blow to Moscow's ambitions. Suddenly, the long and vulnerable border Russia shares with Finland turned from a neutral frontier into a NATO boundary, but the real nightmare came when Sweden finally joined the alliance. That move sealed the Baltic in a strategic sense, creating a ring of NATO powers around Russia's only remaining maritime corridor in the region. This was the one thing Putin had tried to prevent since the early 2000s, and now it's a reality. The situation has become even more critical because Denmark has taken a bold stance in enforcing control over the Danish straits, the key maritime choke points that connect the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. Every Russian warship or supply vessel moving to or from Kaliningrad must pass through these narrow waters. And now Denmark, with NATO backing, holds the ability to monitor or even restrict this movement. For Russia, this is a strategic trap. It means that any military or trade action in the Baltic is no longer in Moscow's hands. It depends entirely on the goodwill of Western nations. This is not just about naval control. The political and military environment in the Baltic has changed dramatically. NATO has expanded its air defense systems, deployed more surveillance aircraft, and positioned missile batteries across Finland, Sweden, and the Baltic states. Denmark has fortified its northern and maritime defenses, while Poland has built one of the most powerful armies in Europe. All these actions form a military wall right on Russia's doorstep. From Moscow's perspective, the Baltic Sea has turned from a zone of opportunity into a zone of vulnerability. Kaliningrad, once considered Russia's trump card in the region, is now effectively isolated. The enclave, wedged between Lithuania and Poland, is cut off by NATO territories on all sides. What was once a powerful forward military outpost is now a strategic burden. Supplying Kaliningrad with troops, weapons, or even basic necessities has become a challenge. NATO surveillance, aircraft, and naval drones monitor every movement in and out of the region. If conflict were ever to break out, Kaliningrad could be sealed off within hours. That's the exact scenario Putin's generals warned about years ago, and now it's becoming an unavoidable truth. Energy routes are also being affected. The Baltic region once served as a key energy corridor for Russia, with gas pipelines like Nord Stream connecting Russian resources to European markets. But after the Nord Stream explosions and growing political mistrust, Europe has rapidly shifted away from Russian energy. Now, with Denmark and its allies tightening control, even maritime trade through the region has become heavily scrutinized. Russia's commercial influence in the Baltic is shrinking fast, and the Kremlin knows it. This change isn't just strategic, it's deeply symbolic. For decades, the Baltic Sea symbolized Russia's connection to Europe. It was where Moscow showed its naval might, conducted massive military exercises, and projected power into NATO's backyard. But now those same waters have turned against it. Every movement of the Russian Navy is tracked, every submarine pinged, every vessel identified by Western radars. In the language of military strategy, Russia has lost the element of freedom in one of its most vital regions. What makes this moment especially painful for Putin is that it's not the result of one big battle or war. It's the result of slow, deliberate political and military moves by his opponents. Step by step, Europe built alliances, strengthened defenses, and removed Russia's leverage. The Kremlin underestimated the determination of smaller nations like Denmark, Lithuania, and Estonia. These countries, once seen as minor players, have now become crucial parts of a united NATO front. They are using their geography to block Russian ambitions, and Moscow can do little to change that without provoking a direct confrontation with the entire Western alliance. Denmark's leadership has been particularly striking. Over the past 2 years, Copenhagen has made it clear that it will not tolerate Russian naval aggression in the Baltic. Danish warships, supported by Allied intelligence, patrol the straits relentlessly. The country has also invested in advanced radar and underwater monitoring systems capable of detecting Russian submarines and unmanned vehicles. This level of surveillance means that Russia's once secretive naval movements are now fully visible. Every step is documented, every maneuver countered. Meanwhile, Sweden and Finland have integrated their armed forces into NATO's command structure faster than anyone expected. Joint military exercises with Denmark and the United States have made their coordination seamless. Airbases in Northern Europe now host advanced NATO aircraft capable of striking deep into Russian territory if necessary. The message to Moscow is clear. Any attempt to regain influence in the Baltic will be met with overwhelming force. Inside Russia, this shift has sparked growing anxiety among military analysts. They realize that the Baltic fleet, which once represented strength, is now trapped. It has no secure escape routes, limited supply lines, and constant exposure to NATO surveillance. Even Russian media has begun to admit that the balance of power has completely changed. For a leader like Putin, who built his political identity on projecting strength, this is more than a tactical defeat. It's a personal humiliation. The loss of influence in the Baltic also undermines Russia's broader geopolitical narrative. For years, the Kremlin has portrayed itself as a great maritime power with reach from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. But losing effective control over the Baltic weakens that image dramatically. It tells the world that even near its own borders, Russia cannot guarantee dominance anymore. The countries that once feared its presence are now the ones setting the rules. Economically, the shift is just as painful. Sanctions, energy restrictions, and trade disruptions have already hit Russia hard. Now, with its Baltic access shrinking, new economic challenges are emerging. Shipping costs are rising, insurance for Russian vessels has become more expensive, and the uncertainty around maritime security is scaring off international partners. European ports are refusing cooperation, and even non-NATO nations are wary of being caught in political tension. Russia's once profitable maritime trade through the Baltic is drying up, further tightening the economic pressure on Moscow. Politically, the Kremlin is trying to spin the situation. State media outlets claim that Russia doesn't need the Baltic anymore, that it is focusing on the Arctic and Asia. But these are hollow statements. Everyone knows that the Baltic Sea holds symbolic and strategic importance far beyond its size. Losing dominance there signals weakness, and Putin's rivals both inside and outside Russia see it. The elite class in Moscow, military strategists, and even the general public are beginning to question whether the Kremlin has any real plan left to counter NATO's growing presence. What's even more striking is how fast Denmark and its allies are transforming the region's security landscape. Joint command centers, radar networks, and missile defense systems are being linked together across national borders. NATO now has the ability to detect and respond to any Russian activity in the Baltic almost instantly. From submarines to aircraft, every move is tracked. The old days when Russia could intimidate smaller nations with military displays are gone. The Baltic has become a fortress, one where Moscow no longer has the keys. For Putin, this transformation represents a direct failure of his long-term vision. His strategy after 2014 was to divide Europe, weaken NATO unity, and expand Russian influence. Instead, his actions in Ukraine and aggressive military posturing in the Baltic achieved the opposite. They united Europe more than ever. Even historically neutral countries chose sides, joining the alliance that Putin feared most. This is the ultimate irony. By trying to prevent NATO from expanding, he triggered the very expansion that now encircles his country. The future of the Baltic region will likely remain tense, but the balance of power has already shifted permanently. Denmark, Sweden, and Finland are not backing down. They've learned from years of Russian intimidation and hybrid warfare tactics. They're now investing in resilience, cyber defenses, undersea cable protection, and energy independence. These measures ensure that Moscow cannot easily use sabotage or pressure to regain control. From a global perspective, this shift is reshaping Europe's strategic map. The Baltic Sea is no longer a gray zone between East and West. It's a fully secured NATO domain. This gives the alliance unprecedented leverage in Northern Europe. It also forces Russia to divert more resources to defend its exposed western borders, stretching its already strained military and economic capacity. Every day, Russia's influence in the Baltic fades a little more. Its ships sail under constant watch, its bases sit surrounded, and its propaganda finds fewer listeners. The symbolic power of the Baltic, the sense that Russia could always return stronger, has evaporated. What remains is a reality that Moscow cannot escape. It is isolated in a sea it once controlled, and that's why analysts call this moment the realization of Putin's greatest Baltic fear. The alliance he sought to weaken now controls the waters around him. The nations he once dismissed as insignificant now dictate the terms of regional security. The fear he spent 2 decades trying to prevent has come true. Russia is boxed in, outmaneuvered, and exposed. The Baltic Sea, once a stage for Russian dominance, has become a reminder of how much has changed. For Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, this is a victory for sovereignty and collective defense. For NATO, it's a major success in securing Northern Europe. But for Putin, it's the clearest sign yet that his era of unchecked power projection is over. This new Baltic reality is reshaping not just military boundaries, but also the psychological balance of Europe. It's showing that even powerful nations can lose influence when their aggression unites the world against them. And as NATO flags rise across the region and Russian warships fade into isolation, one truth becomes undeniable. The Baltic Sea, once a symbol of Russian strength, now stands as the symbol of its greatest geopolitical defeat. And that is how Putin's worst Baltic fear has finally come true.